about, oh, you know who I wanted to talk about actually? I wanted to mention Joanne Bland. And I saw Mike Preisner had posted about her, and I saw a couple other people did, but for the most part, I didn't really see much reporting on Sandra Bland's life and then death. She also died recently. We lost Jesse Jackson, who was a civil rights icon. We talked about him. But Joanne Bland is someone who deserves recognition. People should know who she was. And oftentimes women and also queer leaders like Rustin Baynard are left out of the history, the remembrance of civil rights icons. There are a lot of women who have contributed in extremely important ways to revolutionary movements and civil rights causes and eras, and just aren't remembered for it at the time when they were participating in civil rights movements, were relegated to the side, even though they were on the front line still. They were just played a really important role. And then after they pass, just how they are left out of the history books. The erasure of Black women, especially queer and trans women, from civil rights is pervasive and gross. Yeah, and it's why every time someone passes like Joanne Bland, I'm like, oh, we should take a moment and recognize who she was. And if you don't know, she was a legend. She was a daughter of Selma, a civil rights activist legend. At age 8, she was the youngest person ever jailed for civil rights protests. And by the time she was 11, she was arrested at least 13 times for nonviolent protest action. She was the co-founder and former director of the National Voting Rights Museum in Selma, Alabama. She was a participant in the civil rights movement from its earliest days. And one of the first meetings she went to was presided over by MLK Jr. And again, by the time she was 11 years old, whereas most of us are, learning geography, she had been arrested 13 times for nonviolent protest action. So she was really an amazing woman. Let me see if I can find. Okay, good to know.
If you hit me, I hit you. On about 2 blocks from the bridge, there's this drugstore, Carter's Drugstore. When I was a kid, Carter's had a lunch counter, and I wanted to sit at the lunch counter, but my grandmother said I couldn't. She said, colored children, that's what we were called in, can't sit at the counter. It didn't stop me from wanting to sit at that counter. Every time I pass by, I see those white kids sitting there, spinning around on those stools, licking.
Also, her mom died. Her mom died in a white hospital because she was waiting on a blood transfusion, but they would only give her black blood. They're like, this black woman is not getting a white blood transfusion, which is just really fucked up, and she died.
Those ice cream cones, and I'd be wishing it was me. This particular day, grandmother was talking to one of her friends in front of the store, and I was doing what I always do when I'm near Carter's. I'm peeping through that window and wishing. But this day, my grandmother noticed, and she leaned over my shoulder, and she pointed through the window toward the counter. She said, when we get our freedom, you can do that too. I became a freedom fighter that day. I understood instantly that the freedom that grandma and her friends were going for was the good freedom. You know, the one that would let me sit at that counter. My name is Joanne Bland, and I'm from Selma, Alabama. It's my hometown. I started going down to First Baptist with my sister and training with SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Everything was organized and well thought out because of other movements in other places. You can learn from those that what we did wrong, what we could improve upon, and I'm pretty sure that's what SNCC and SCLC, Dr. King's organization, did, from experience. I'm standing at historic First Baptist Church here in Selma. Downstairs here is the basement where they tried to teach me nonviolence. But I spent many days in this basement. This was SNCC headquarters. By the time they got to Selma, they already knew some of the things, or most of the things that could possibly happen. So they trained.
In med school, we had an entire paper on the statistical preventable deaths between Maori, Pacifica, and NZ Europeans. Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, medical racism still exists. Unfortunately, Black women are still 4 times, I think, more likely to die in maternity. While pregnant Black women who are dying at 4 times the rate because of racism. That's what happened with, let me remember her name, Adriana Smith. Yeah, Adriana Smith. We talked about her story last year. Adriana Smith was the woman in Georgia who was declared brain dead, but then was put on life support against the wishes of her family because of Georgia's heartbeat bill. And the Adriana Smith was pregnant, and so the state was like, this baby has to be delivered, and she was dead, and so they kept her corpse alive. I mean, not obviously alive. They kept her on life support. They used her as an incubator, and then they cut the baby out of her, and the baby was 1 pound when it was born, had a lot of medical issues because it was extremely underweight due to being premature, very, very premature. It was only, the baby was 6 months old when the doctors did a cesarean section on Adriana Smith. And anyway, what had happened was Adriana Smith went to the hospital. She had been complaining of headaches. She went to the hospital, told them that she had been having these headaches, and they basically dismissed her. They just gave her some medication. They sent her home. And the next morning, her boyfriend found her, and she was in a really bad state. He called 911. It turns out that she had blood clots in her brain, and they took her to the emergency room, but she was declared brain dead. And also starved because the mother wasn't eating the necessary amount because she was dead. Yeah. They had her on life support just to get to a point where they could remove the baby from her body. And the family did not want that because that is horrifying. That is like a sick experiment. Her body was decomposing. Yeah, it's a horror story. It really is. And anyway, it's a terrible, it's an example that shows, of course, how terrible these heartbeat bills are, the restrictions on abortion in states like Georgia, but also unfortunately, the racism that still exists in our medical system, where Black women who are pregnant are dismissed. Their medical issues are not thoroughly checked out all the time. And then you end up in a situation like Adriana Smith's, where she was given just some simple meds and sent home, and she had she had blood clots, and that's why she had headaches. That most of the times they don't take seriously when Black and brown women are sick and in pain. It's awful. Yes. And there's already the issue of women. There's already the issue of women not calling for medical assistance because culturally women's pain is not taken seriously. because women are expected to kind of just shoulder this pain. And so there's already a problem with women who will not, who do not call 911, who do not seek medical assistance when something is wrong. And then, you know, additional layers to that involving race and class, of course. Even wealthy women like Serena Williams who had complications ignored. Yeah. Yeah. They did a precedent legal system from her as always using black bodies to do their sick. Yes, there is a horrifying history of using black bodies for medical experiments. I remember some random medical student compiled his own version of a dermatology book archiving what skin issues looked like on black skin because they didn't fucking already have one in like 2018. Yeah, I know. It's very like, what the fuck? Although it's not always nice to live here, I'm very proud to be from Montgomery, Alabama, where so many courageous black women and men sacrificed, fought the fight, and led with so much courage. So much progress was made, even though there's so much more to go. Highly recommend the Legacy Museum if any chatters find themselves in town. Yeah, it's why it's why it always pisses me off when liberals will be like, fuck these red states because these states are governed by awful conservatives. And it's like, there are a lot of people who live in red states who do not deserve this, who we are, you know, we are fighting for them as well. This is not a, oh, fuck these red states and everyone who lives in them. Let them fail. Let them secede or whatever they talk about doing, whatever these MAGAs talk about doing. I get told all the time to die by liberals because my state is deep red. They're like, yeah, well, you voted for this. It's like there are a lot of people in the South who are fighting for their rights. There's a long history of social justice and social and political justice movements that started in the South and are still being carried on.
Trained us to how to protect ourselves. I didn't like nonviolence training.
I put my water.
I like to tell people I flunked. My sisters would put me out of the church. I'd act so ugly. Because if you yelled at me, I was going to yell back at you. If you hit me, I was going to shove me, I was going to shove you. First, I'm a kid, right? I may be 10. And second, I was born in the hood, the real hood. George Washington Carver home. The law of the land said, if you hit me, I hit you back. I had seen the way whites treated blacks here. And I couldn't understand why they didn't want me to defend myself. They were teaching you to take it, you know, so they would stand and yell and, oh, it would just be awful. I didn't like it. I had the wrong meaning of it. It didn't mean you couldn't defend yourself. It means that you try to diffuse it before it happens, and you certainly don't instigate it. "59 years ago, John and Hosea led us up to the bridge on March 7th, 1965, to be beaten by law enforcement officers.
The original
That day
rednecks
went
were a
down in
group of
history as
fighting
Bloody
for
Sunday.
solidarity of the workers.
A memory that's foremost for me would probably be
Unfortunately, redneck has now come to be associated with, like, you know, the MAGA crowd.
Bloody Sunday because it was so traumatic. Okay, I had never experienced violence, and I wasn't expecting violence when I got into the line. I just thought it was a regular march. We're going to march to Montgomery, and also I had no idea how far
There's
Montgomery
certainly
was.
hateful, racist people in blue states.
So
yeah,
I just jumped in the line because
know.
that's the part of the movement I like. I like the marching. I like the songs, the chants. I liked all of that. Well, and not going to school, I like that too. They beat everybody.
She was a child foot
Black,
soldier in
white,
the 60s
male,
and was
female,
marching.
old, young. It was horrible.
She was a part of
Just horrible.
of Bloody
And
Sunday.
then the tear gas, you can't breathe, you can't see. Sometimes I'm at a good place with this history. because sort of when I have tours.
And if you live in Selma or if you visit Selma and you go to the Foot Soldiers Park, that was something that Joanne founded. It was to preserve and teach the history of Selma to inspire future activists. So if you go to the National Voting Rights Museum, the Foot Soldiers Park, that was Joanne.
It's like a performance. You know, I say the same thing over and over, but when I'm like this in an intimate setting, I realize that the trauma's still there. I'm not where I was with it because talking about it has been like therapy. I was 11 years old in 1965 on that bridge, March 7th, 1965 to be exact. You know, that day went down as Bloody Sunday. I had no idea that it was going to be violence, but when it happened, when it started, I was terrified and horrified to see people laying, bleeding, and then the tear gas got me, so I panicked, and we were trying to get back across the bridge. The last thing that I remember on that bridge that day was seeing this horse and this lady, and I don't know what happened. Did the man on the horse hit her, or did he run over her with the horse? But you know, even today, 59 years later, I can still hear the sound her head made when it hit that pavement. The next thing I remember, I was on the city side of the bridge. I was in the back of a car, and my head was in my sister Linda's lap, and Linda was crying. And when I became fully awake, I realized what was falling on my face were not her tears. It was my sister's blood. She had been beaten on this bridge, 14 years old.
God.
Beaten on this bridge and had wounds in her head that required 35 stitches. Some people were even hurt worse. Bones were broken because people were being trampled. It was horrible. Just simply.
And I've made this point before, but I'm going to make it again. The use of animals by law enforcement is so sickening and abusive. Horses in particular are creatures that they are naturally skittish. They are trained to, they not trained. They have natural instincts to flee from chaos. That's why, you know, the slightest thing can cause them to rear up and take off because they are prey animals. Yes, they innately understand how to recognize a threat and to quickly run away from it. So even when you have a horse that is trained, that responds to you, otherwise, if it is spooked, it will take off and there is nothing you can do. So like using horses, as law enforcement historically has, to brutalize people, like this is something they still do. We talked about this because I think I wrote a thread on it last year on Twitter, but it's straight up animal abuse. The training of dogs to attack is so insidious as well. Yeah, it's all fucked. A lot of Black people are scared of dogs to this day because of how they used dogs, how they still use dogs.
Horrible. And it seemed like it lasted forever.
Yeah, how people turn around and call this nonviolent.
My sister grabbed my hand because I screamed when I saw her. She was the blood. I screamed and she grabbed my hand and we started running. And people were running back, trying to get back to their houses and over in our area. And those same men who beat us on the bridge were behind us. What happened at that bridge didn't stop at that bridge. It happened down in my area where I grew up at all night long. We ran past our house because we didn't think we had time to unlock the door. We ran down the First Baptist Church because we knew the doors would be open. And sure enough, we ran inside and thinking we would be safe. We were not. They came into the church and started beating people all over again. I saw them pick up a young man, about 16 years of age, and hoist him above their heads and throw him through the doors where the baptismal pool was. He broke both of his arms. I saw a lady fall all the way down the steps of First Baptist, and we couldn't stop and help her or we'd be beaten too. It was horrible, and it lasted forever. Every major tragedy in the United States, they send in counselors, psychologists, and therapists and stuff. Nobody came to help us. Nobody even thought to come and help us. Life just went on, so you internalized it, and it became a part of you that just stayed there. It wouldn't go away, but you didn't talk about it. This little girl right here is me, and we were at a protest. I was arrested 13 times by the age of 11. The first time I was arrested, I was with my grandmother. We had gone to the courthouse, she and a bunch of other women. I think the courthouse was open one day a month for people to register, right? And we were standing at what was known as the colored entrance. When we climbed up the steps, I saw this lady run to the door inside, and she taped a piece of paper on the door, and it said, when I got close enough, it said, "Out to lunch." I remember thinking, white people sure eat early. But the women just stood there. But I could hear the sound of engines, cars going down behind us on Alabama Avenue. Then I heard a different sound of some kind of big vehicle coming. It turned out it was a yellow school bus. Now, when I was a child, African Americans didn't have yet buses to ride on. We had to walk to school no matter how far it was. I was excited when I saw them start grabbing the women, and the women grabbing their babies, and they're getting on the bus, right? I was excited. I was so happy. I was like, "Grandma, can I sit by the window?" And she said, "Sure, babe." So we get on the bus, and I'm by the window, and I'm ecstatic. The bus started, rolled 2 blocks, and we're in front of the city jail. I'm like, "Grandma, why are we here?" She said, "They're gonna arrest us." And I said, "Why?" She said, "Don't worry about it, baby. One day things are gonna change."
Yeah, and the whole concept of femininity and protecting women and gendered roles in society where, men are protectors and women are to be protected, that did not extend ever to Black women. The way that Black women, they during slavery would make that separation between Black women and white women and light-skinned women. Black women were never seen as women, and therefore we're not afforded we're not afforded femininity. We're not afforded, the cultural ideals around respecting and protecting women.
This is where we left from, what is now known as Bloody Sunday. And we assembled right there. And I followed John Lewis and Hosea Williams, Albert Turner, and Charles Malden right out through there, across that cement to the bridge to be beaten by law enforcement officers. So I thought, and I think it's important, because when we tear down, rename, remove, new history begins, and old history is forgotten. This history is too important to the fabric of this nation to be forgotten. Everyone that came to Selma, I took to that cement and made them pick up a rock from the cement. Made them pick up a rock from the cement and hold it in their hands. I said, that's a way to connect them. Something tangible in their hands. I tell them they could take it or they could leave it. If they take it, they need to put it where they can see it. Where they can see it every day. Because when you see injustice committed against anyone in the whole rainbow of humanity, and you feel like you can't do anything, go pick up that rock and take from it the strength of the ordinary people who stood on that same rock and made history that not only changed the South, but this entire nation. And then get up off your behinds and do something. If you don't do anything but throw that rock and scream until you're heard. It went from just saving that cement to a full park, because at the GWC, when I was growing up, the whole playground was covered with toys. Now they have one little piece, one of those plastic all-in-ones, and a small one at that, for over 200 children to play on. So I said, we need to put a park here, a real park with a real playground. And then it became Foot Soldiers Park, right? So now we also needed a place where we could store.
Malcolm X speech from 1964 right here in LA should be reread annually. The most disrespected person in America is the black woman. The most unprotected person in America is the black woman. The most neglected person in America is the black woman. Yeah. And we're talking about Joanne Bland because she just passed, and she was an icon in the civil rights movement in Selma, where she was born and raised and spent her whole life. And black women, unfortunately, have also historically been erased from the social and political justice movements that they were an important part of.
These oral histories. There's no reason that with all this modern technology to 100 years from now, that your descendants can come in and hear me tell my story from my mouth, unedited by anyone. And
often
then the
started,
importance of that, I didn't know would be like it is today. I never thought, when I thought of this idea, that one day this would happen. They would start to censor our history and rewrite it. So out of that came the educational building. But we also needed a place in the educational building that would teach this history, that will teach the next generation of children where we've been as a nation, and then they can take it from there. And we wanted it to belong to the community. Selma is one of the most underserved communities in America. And sometimes I think they're punishing us for that victory. There's also the area where the park is, where all the history happened. It's the most underserved community in Selma. And if they know how hard fought the vote to get the vote was, and people died. People died for us to have.
This is why, like, when there's definitely a generational thing with older Black Americans and younger ones, older Black Americans who remember when they did not have the right to vote. And to them, the power to exercise your vote is everything. And is also, not just the ability to vote, but the strength of in states, the Black community voting block. Like we just talked about this in Illinois with Jesse Jackson, where he told Black residents, hey, this white establishment political machine, they need your vote. And you vote for Democrats and you vote consistently. Don't just hand over your vote. Use it as leverage because they need your vote. And I know that there's kind of a clashing between younger Black Americans who have a different idea around around how to win power in this country, and it not just being through electoral politics, versus with older Black Americans who, again, they lived in a time when they couldn't vote. Like they remember what it was like to fight for just the right to vote. And so it's something that they don't take for granted. And they do place a lot of importance in that right. I find it a little sad. I try to convince them, but they don't listen. Like, this was something that during Zohran Mamdani's campaign, I know a lot of young Black people who are working on his campaign were going into the community and talking to older Black New Yorkers because they were going to, vote for the establishment candidate who was Cuomo. Yep, I was there personally. Yeah. So this is the type of work that like younger members of a community do a lot of, in the same way young Latinos who the issues that they have to deal with are a lot of older Latinos, their parents, their relatives being conservative in states like Arizona and in Florida. A lot of the movement to Latinos being more progressive is because of younger gen Latinos who are like, this is their community, and they're the ones who are doing the work and the outreach and trying to bridge the generational gap. I have a pretty unique experience because my mom and grandparents do not vote because they're incredibly disillusioned. My dad votes because he understands this, but he's libertarian. Yeah, that's a pretty unique experience. Even daring to exercise that right was insurmountably dangerous. Things like targeting felons to disenfranchise them from the ability to vote was a way to keep Black people from voting. Yes, and they are still doing voter suppression. They are still trying all the time to suppress the Black vote. They legislatively prevent Black people from voting every way they can. So it still is, like, this still is a reality that Black people still do not have the total free and fair right to vote because of redistricting. Yes, because of gerrymandering, because of purging voter rolls, voting requirements that go back to the Jim Crow era.
The rights we have today, beaten and killed. Yet, some people stop using it. I almost understand it, though, why people don't vote, because they don't. We've been voting since 1965, right? What has changed? And I said, of course your vote doesn't count if you don't use it. And then I tried to show them the value of their vote. We're trying to make voting harder by passing the state back now. If it was not valuable, why are people always trying to take it away from you? The election coming up is a critical election for not only Alabama, but America. So we have to get the vote out. We have to, those who are hiding behind that big A word, apathy, we have to get them from behind it. So sometimes you have to meet people where they are. You have to have conversations.
Anyway, rest in power to Joanne Bland. And now we all know who she is and what she did in her life. And you can go forth with that. You can go forth with that knowledge and the preservation of her memory. This is why representation matters, not just because, having someone's presence there is good enough. No, representation matters so you can learn from their examples, because if you can maybe accomplish even a portion with those who came before you, we'd be in a better place. Yeah, and obviously it's like, the way that representation has been wielded by the establishment to present the aesthetics of democracy and social justice and political equality, but often, the representation is hollow, because, as we know, having a seat at the table doesn't matter if the table still remains in place. If it is still, you have a seat, but the expectation is to uphold the table, like uphold the status quo. And it's so it's like, oh, it's so frustrating to have people like K-hivers and, I don't know, Jasmine Crockett stands, which I think are really just K-hivers, who pull the Black women are the most disrespected group in this country, which is true. The misogynoir that Black women experience on a daily basis is vile. But hiding behind identity politics by pushing forth candidates who are not good for Black women, just like they're not good for the working class, of which Black women are members of. It's frustrating to hide behind the truth that Black women experience so much misogyny and racism, but that the answer is not candidates, be they Black women, who are there to protect the establishment, who are there to get that seat at the table. But that means upholding the status quo. And that means leaving Black women, most of whom are working class, most of whom are struggling, leaving them in the dust. Having Black women in power is not going to change the reality, the circumstances for the majority of Black women if they are not pushing for policies that address those inequalities, like really, really, really address them. God damn, it was so unbelievably frustrating telling libs that the time to demand something from their supposed representatives was during a presidential election. Hear them say, just vote blue. Yeah, I mean, that's the bullshit that we're seeing right now, 2.5 years before the next presidential election. We're just doing it earlier and earlier now. I'm like, oh my God, we're already doing vote blue no matter who 2.5 years out, when Democrats are signaling right now that legislatively they're not going to do anything about fighting fascism. How do you fight fascism when you will not say that you are getting rid of ICE? How are you going to how are you going to fight fascism when you continue to support Israel? That's not fighting fascism. That's funding fascism. Years out, we have no imagination. Yeah, none. Don't we want better? Don't we want to imagine? Isn't that what it's all about? Imagining better? You know, we got time right now. We've got 2.5 years.